is on.
Sound is on.
Oh.
Okay.
And Michael's recording.
All right. Should we go ahead and get started
I
here?
think so.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to Networking for Introverts. We really appreciate College of Graduate Studies inviting Career Services here to talk with you today. This particular topic is near and dear to my heart. I am a very proud introvert. I imagine everyone else is here too. Just gauge, how many folks do we have on Zoom?
Right now we have 7.
Okay, and one in person. Thank you for coming. So it was a big question in my mind today, how many people would show up on Zoom and how many would be actually in person? And following the lines of logic with introverts, very proud of you for showing up in person.
I was in the library,
Yeah.
so I didn't have to walk over.
Yeah, thank you for everybody who are joining in Zoom. This is a fairly new topic for Career Services. Hi, welcome. Come on in.
So many introverts.
So many introverts, a couple more in person. We really appreciate it. So today we're talking about networking for introverts. And how many of you have done any kind of assessment, formal assessment in gauging your introversion? Anybody on Zoom? Anybody person?
Probably long ago, or you did the Myers-Briggs.
Yeah, the Myers-Briggs.
I haven't
Myers-Briggs,
done it
yeah.
like years. When I took Myers-Briggs, I got introvert or extrovert, but I'm like,
Is that true? Right.
you're lying to me.
Yeah. So I recently this summer I had an opportunity to do a ton of self-assessments for a degree that I'm working on, and of course one of them was the Myers-Briggs, and some other ones just related to teaching and learning, and trying to negotiate like what that looks like in my role and what that looks like for my students. And so, of course, no surprise, 76% introverted right here. And I did ask one of my students, the highest score I think I saw was a 92%. That was pretty turtle in place, right? So we'll get started here. We're going to talk a little bit about career services just briefly, and then we'll go into what it means to be an introvert and strategies for networking, because that's really why we're here today. So for those of you who have not worked with career services, we are here for you as students, current students. We work a lot with prospective students, certainly alumni after you leave University of Idaho. We are available free services for life. You can always come back and utilize our services. Faculty and staff, we do work quite closely with faculty and staff to deliver presentations just like this one, and employers. So our employer relation team works a lot with a lot of the employers that you saw coming to the career fair last week, just to make sure that students have the opportunity to find out what different opportunities there are for them. So we advise on things like resumes and CVs, cover letters. If you know people that want to do any major career exploration, or you want to do that yourself, we can certainly help with that. Graduate school applications, and then of course job and internship searching. And we have multiple different routes, whether you're more interested in research, interested in going into industry, we can talk a little bit about that. If you do have an interview and you are nervous about having that interview, we do a lot of interview preparation. We can even do a mock interview with you. And we have a digital tool called Big Interview where you can access it 24/7 to do your own interview practice. So say you have something on Friday night, don't have time to meet with us before Monday, you can get onto Big Interview and just practice your answers, and it'll actually give you some analytics about your pace of speech and your filler words and things like that.
Is it like ask you questions
It
out
does.
loud?
Yeah, so you turn your camera and your microphone on and you can play practice sets of questions. Wow. And then it'll give you some data on your responses. So it's kind of an interesting tool, especially, if you can't get in touch with us or get to us right away, then that's a good kind of self-service thing to do. I tell people sometimes it feels a little creepy and weird, but
They're like a stern face.
no, they're
looking
pretty
at you.
nice faces. Yeah, they're pretty friendly.
Is it exclusively, sorry to interrupt.
No,
Is
not
it
at all.
exclusively for interview prep, or say like I'm preparing a presentation, like for example, I'm here because I'm presenting at a conference next week.
Right, right. It's mostly interview prep.
Okay.
Yeah, and it does have like different sets of questions that it can ask you, but yeah, so that's called big interview again. And then networking and professionalism, just like this one. This is a very special topic, like I said, near and dear to my heart. Navigating LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn profile or you just want a little bit of feedback on your LinkedIn profile, we can help with that. And then preparing for the career fair. So last week's career fair, I think we had record attendance. We're really proud of that. Lots and lots of people came through that facility. Did anybody here go? No. Well, you introverts, you were not among the 1,500 people that were there, but that is all right. We'll have another one in the spring. It is on February 12th, I believe, is when the spring one is going to be. This is the main page of our website. You're welcome to scan this QR code just to take a look, but we have a ton of great resources. So appointment scheduling is done through here. Our career resources, we have anything on all of those topics related to interviewing, all of the ones that I mentioned, resumes, looking for different opportunities. Events and info sessions. This is a great way if you're looking at a specific employer, you might see if they're holding an information session, just to be able to get a little bit of insight on what they're looking for. If you are planning on going into an industry job. And then, of course, job listings. So Handshake is our main job and internship listing site. And this has, again, the job listings, employer information sessions, career fairs and events, and our appointment scheduling. All right, so let's get to the topic at hand. I want to make sure I'm staying on track here. So what does it mean to be an introvert? Let's kind of take that as a broad question. Does anybody have any ideas? And you can certainly chime in on Zoom if you like. This is the answer I expected. Yeah, tell me.
For me, introversion means that when I spend a lot of social time with people or do a big presentation, I'm totally drained afterwards. Like just so drained. I enjoy it most of the time, but I'm like, I need to go be by myself alone after.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody agree with that? Yeah, I've been there.
That my social battery.
Yeah.
It's very true. So really coming from psychology, it's really an inward orientation to your mental life. And so introverts generally gain energy from reflection, and extroverts gain that from social interaction. And so we actually lose energy when it comes to social interaction. So if you're looking at this range, and I'm going to just minimize this a little bit so we can see the whole thing. The different dimensions of human personality. So it's a range. It ranges extroversion to introversion. And we have this ambiversion, which is kind of right in the middle. And most people are not at either extreme of these. So for example, an extroversion, like we mentioned, gets energized from interactions with other people. Introversions get energized from being alone. And then kind of in the middle, yeah, you enjoy spending time with people, but you really do need to recharge after some of those social interactions. And extroverts really thrive in those social situations. Like they crave that energy, they crave that interaction, whereas often we can feel very drained, like you mentioned, your battery goes down. And so introverts generally, and this does not apply to everybody. You can be extroverted in certain situations and introverted in others. Are generally prefer smaller groups of friends, closer networks versus having large social and outgoing settings. And so here's one thing that I think is kind of a little bit of a misnomer. So some people think you're just shy. And kind of this, I think this gets reinforced from when we were very young, when, you know, if your parents introduce you to somebody and you're really little and you don't say anything, you're just clinging to their leg. Oops, no, don't restart.
Oh, I guess it,
There we go.
it said 23 hours.
Okay,
Like,
good.
no.
Yeah, it shouldn't, hopefully it won't restart. You know, and your parents are making excuses saying, oh, she's just shy, right? She doesn't want to. That could be true, or it could be that you are an introvert. So introversion is often mistaken for shyness. And a lot of our information, this book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Talking, it's very good. Introversion is often mistaken for shyness. So shyness means that you want to engage, but you're kind of fearful of that social disapproval or being humiliated in public, whereas introverts really have a preference for less stimulating environments, which I think is an interesting distinction when you think about it. You know, I've been called shy because I don't like public speaking, and I can be extroverted, but not necessarily do I want to be, you know. So I think there's a really nuanced difference between that. Any questions so far? Thoughts?
I started listening to that book and it's excellent.
It's really
fascinating. I didn't finish it, but I'm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, and I'll get into just like a couple more points that I thought were really interesting. But some of the characteristics of introverts, really enjoying your solitude, and so you can like kind of see if some of these apply to you. They might not all apply to you, but I know that's like certainly my happy space is when I can be in my office, quiet, working alone. I don't necessarily need a lot of people around me to be able to have that enjoyment. Working best on your own, feeling drained after being out. Disliking small talk. I think this is an interesting one. How many of you feel like you're in that category? Yeah, a few. Sometimes. What I'm talking about here is more, instead of, we want more meaningful interactions, more in-depth discussions on topics of interest. So less, how's the weather today, you know, that kind of thing. But I do think that sometimes those small talk strategies are great conversation starters. So if you are craving a little bit of like trying to connect with somebody and you're finding it difficult, that might be a good way to start talking with somebody. Usually when I have a student that is coming in, you know, there's this moment where we're walking back to my office, and if I ask a question, oh gosh, it's really chilly out today, or something like that, that actually breaks the tension a little bit. And then preferring a quiet weekend to too many obligations. So not overscheduling yourself. I think that's a really good one.
I have two really extroverted children. Of my four, two are introverts, two seem to be extroverts, and they just want to go from activity to activity to activity.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I can do one fall festival maybe.
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
like 4 today.
My sister has the same thing, and she only has one child, and that child has to be occupied at all times. It's very, I don't know how she does it. It's very draining, right? Is there any thoughts from our online folks about this? Anybody? Happy to entertain any questions or thoughts at the moment.
Oh, I've got a question.
Okay.
I can read it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Jazz asked, do you have any suggestions for how to start small talk for introverts? I think breaking the ice is so necessary, but so hard.
Yeah, I think it's of course situational, but we'll get into a couple more strategies for that in just a few minutes. Really, it comes down to planning, and I don't know how many in the room here are planners. I know that's like an essential characteristic of mine, is that I like to know where I'm going and what I'm doing, because that helps me feel more at ease with whatever situation. So Jazz, we'll get to that in just a second here. I have a couple of tips for you on that.
There was one other
Yeah,
question. I don't know how serious the question was, but it was, are there people who do enjoy small talk?
there are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, I would say that it's probably very much an extrovert trait. Just being able to connect with anybody, that's that thing that makes your brain vibrate and you really like, doing that. That is not my personal characteristic, but I know some people that are really social and really get a lot of energy from just even small talk with people.
Kind of like making the rounds in a room.
Exactly.
Like they like that.
Yeah,
To me,
absolutely.
that's like a nightmare.
It sounds
The idea of,
terrifying.
like,
Halloween's coming up, and that's the scary thing. So let's see. So let's talk a little bit about some of the strengths of introverts, and I think this is really important. What I want to impress upon you is that introversion is not an affliction. It is not something to get over. It is a physical way that you are. It is your brain. It is how you are. There is nothing wrong with it. So it is a very, very healthy way of negotiating the world. And the reason that I say that is because you really can, as an introvert, develop more meaningful and closer relationships. And because of those smaller, in-depth conversations that you might like to have. Introverts are often very empathetic and listen very carefully. So especially in meetings, when you are hearing a lot of voices and maybe you're not the first one to speak up, or maybe it's very difficult to, kind of get a word in edgewise, you're the one that's taking in all of that information around you. And so you think very carefully before you speak. I think introverts have a tendency to be very observant, very self-motivated, spending a lot of time working alone and understanding like what your tasks are, how you're planning your time. And then I think introverts make excellent leaders because they do listen very closely and they do understand what people are needing from certain situations, and they really champion the strengths of other people. So some of the challenges for introverts, of course, networking in large gatherings. And one of the things, and I'll talk a little bit more about this too, but and I wrote it down too, and it's very much related to our cognitive, how our brain works. And there's neuroscience that I don't totally understand in here, but when you think about it, introverts have a much they're very reactive to stimulus, right? And so we may need much less dopamine to be overstimulated. And so when you are in a large gathering like that, it's almost instant that you start to feel tired and you start to have too much and need to retreat. Whereas an extroverted person, they really thrive on that interaction. They really thrive on that dopamine. Talking to people energizes them. And so that's why when you are thinking about large conferences or you're thinking about large gatherings, it can be exhausting, even just thinking about talking to all the people there. Another thing is that extroversion, if you think about our society, how business works, we're always asked to, speak up, talk with people, network, do all of these things to make connections in a way that, is not necessarily natural to how we operate in the world. So it's very valued in business, being able to be assertive, being able to make a ton of friends. And that's not always how we operate. And even if you think about like how many people in the room love when the teacher says we're going to have group projects, right? Everybody? Yeah, no, I mean, like for me, a group project just sort of makes me cringe a little bit, even though it's, supposedly, the more social thing to do, right? It's the way we'll learn better if we work with teams. It's the way we'll learn better on how to work with teams for sure, but it's not always the most comfortable thing to do.
I feel like we're not taught beforehand
Mhm.
how to work with a team
Right,
before getting put in group projects. Like,
right.
my children will talk about how much they hate group projects because of the dynamics that will always exist.
Right.
Somebody's doing all the work, somebody's doing none of the work and gets credit the same.
And the way we talk about teamwork, in a career services way is teams function much more smoothly when everybody has a designated role, when there's less ambiguity, when people know what they're doing and what's expected. And that's not always the case. Group projects are not always designed like that. And so sometimes it falls on like somebody to take charge, usually the extroverted person, and then maybe the introverted feels a little bit more left in the dust. So I really think, like, if you are designing a group project, like making sure that everybody has a clearly defined role is really important. But yeah, you're right. There's lots of memes about group projects. One other challenge is that we're often quieter and sometimes eclipsed by louder and more emphatic voices. And so I think there's just a misconception that we don't have things to say. And that's not true. We do have things to say. It's just there's not always that entry point, or we can't always figure out where that place is where we can make our voices heard. And I think sometimes, especially in work situations, if you have somebody that really values extroversion, they value the collaboration, the everybody talking, then it's a little bit more difficult to have your ideas heard that way. Sometimes I will even ask for other ways to contribute to a situation. So usually that can look like submitting your ideas in writing, or doing some kind of poll that's a little bit more anonymous where you don't have to put yourself on the spot. Those are some good strategies for, like, if you are designing an activity where you want other people to contribute, just making sure that there's different ways that people can contribute. Yeah, sensitive to the environment and being put on the spot. And when I say sensitive to the environment, I mean that can come down to the lighting in the room, right? I very purposefully keep the lighting in my office very low and calm and quiet because I'm not crazy about overhead lighting. If I can control it, I will. Or too much music, too much noise, too much chatter. That can also be tiring, frankly. And then open office layouts, the bane of my existence. I don't know about you guys, but it's like probably the hardest way to work for an introvert is in a collaborative environment, like an open office layout. Sometimes you just need a space to think, to be quiet and think, and that's how you get your ideas across. So some strategies that we have for networking. First, we'll talk about them in an active way and then in a passive way. So active networking, good strategy for this is planning your time. And how many here are planners who like to? Yeah, everybody. That's great. How about online? You can raise your hand or just put it in the chat. We have some yeps. Yes. Yep. Okay. So understanding why you are going to an event. So say we're talking about networking night or another, like a conference networking event. Why are you going and what do you hope to achieve? And if you can actually write this out for yourself, that helps give you a starting point, right? That'll help make you a roadmap for the event. On the day of events, I like to conserve my energy. So not planning a lot of high stimulus things the day before. It's a little more difficult at conferences. You might have to skip a session to be able to have enough energy to go to the thing. But if you can give yourself a little bit of downtime before, and then save that energy, you know why you're going, you know what you're there to accomplish, and that can be a good strategy for those high energy events.
Especially if you have to fly from here somewhere and you're like flying the entire day because you
Yes.
have to fly so
And
many places.
Flying is exhausting, right?
Yeah.
Because you're with a ton of people all day long, and there's lots of unpredictability. I think introverts have a good way of negotiating the world. We do kind of learn how to deal with those situations, but it doesn't mean it doesn't drain us. It just means that we're very adaptable. So making sure, like, event logistics along the planning lines, making sure you know where it is, where you're going to park, did they charge for parking, what you're going to wear, and then arrive early to the sessions if possible. Sometimes I think that helps us get kind of a layout of the room. Usually when I'm in a space and I can know the layout of the space, I know where somebody's speaking, that kind of helps me acclimate a little bit faster to it.
You don't have to like talk to people if you need to squeeze into a row. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's kind of late. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
I have to talk to them.
Yeah.
Say excuse me to them.
I know this isn't the most it's not strategic for networking, it's strategic for my own self-preservation, is the back chair at the corner of the conference. Like, if you want to talk to people, you probably should move forward, but sometimes that's the safe place. So I do like to talk about safety in numbers. Bring a friend or a colleague if you are going to a networking event, but do try to challenge yourself to break away, especially if you are trying to make specific connections. Sometimes that's nice to have a person there that you can just talk with to, kind of fill the time a little bit until you're ready to go to talk with someone. If it's possible to find a quiet corner to have a conversation, that's nice. That can be a little bit more recharging. It's very distracting, especially this is a picture of engineering networking night in the spring, and very hard to have those conversations. You sort of have to like break away, find a wall, to be able to have a quiet conversation with somebody. But if you can, it's a good strategy. And then plan who you like to talk with. And it doesn't have to be everybody, right? And so don't put the pressure on yourself that you have to meet and greet with as many people. Really, you want meaningful connections. And so knowing why you're going, knowing who you want to talk to, that's really the plan there. And so, Jazz, you had mentioned, like, how do you start small talk? And it really can be anything. I do sometimes, especially if I'm sensing that the other person is just as introverted as me, it might be just like an icebreaker, like, there's a lot of people here. And sometimes asking questions of people, open-ended questions, is a good way to start. So it's a little bit easier than the kind of yes, no questions. Are you having a good day? Yes. Then that's the end of the conversation. But maybe you start something more like, oh, what brings you to the conference? And then that can answer, or that can open up a little bit more conversation. Writing out and practicing introducing yourself. And I really recommend this. You don't want it to sound forced, but you want to have an idea in your head of what you want to say. So actually having, hey, I'm Amy, nice to meet you. I'm from Moscow, Idaho. Where are you from? And that can start a conversation. Again, be wary of the one-word answers. that's sometimes hard to fall into. Think about what questions you would want to know. Are you looking for career advice? Are you looking for information about the organization? What were some of the things that you were networking with the camp organization? What were you wanting to know from them?
Yeah, so we were talking a little bit ahead of time. So my whole research focus is camp. And so early in my grad program, I went for the very first time to a big national conference of the American Camp Association. I knew no one there. So I zeroed in on, I don't know if this is answering your question, but I zeroed in on the researchers who were there, which a lot of people weren't researchers.
Okay.
And so I narrowed my focus on them. I went to their sessions, I introduced myself to them, which was scary. I'm like, hey, I wrote a paper on your research study, and they're like, that's so weird, thanks for talking to me. And I made connections that have really paid off over the last few years. And like it was very intentional, and asking them about their research, what they want to see like as it progresses, where they want to go, if they're continuing the research line that I wrote a paper about or whatever, like things like that.
Yeah.
Like where do you see, like I went and introduced myself to the director of research, and I was like, where do you see the organization going? Here's what I'm doing in research, like does that fit in? And like that has actually really paid off.
Oh, that's
It
awesome.
was so scary,
Yeah.
but it worked.
Michael, do you want to chime in? Do you have any networking opportunities that you've been involved with and some good questions that you've asked?
Yeah, like specifically at, yeah, I mean, there's a new trend at conferences when I go where they do like small dinners, like small group dinners. Has anyone ever seen this before? You can sign
Like
up for them
that.
usually. Yeah, so like I went to one this summer in Philadelphia where it was like the cap was like no more than 10 people, and you could like choose, they're like, this is like a whiskey bar you could go to, and I did that and I thought it was pretty fun. And they're kind of like fun environments, and also like they're like little, you have to like walk over to it, so you walk with everybody over there. So those are like kind of fun things. I would say if you just see opportunities like that, like don't just like go back to your hotel room, you know.
Yeah.
That's kind of
I
how.
love those smaller interactions can sometimes be a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah, and I also find like I generally like I'm not necessarily entirely introverted, but I also like have a hard time like just approaching someone, like kind of
Hmm.
cold approaching someone. And so, but I'll just go to the cocktail hours, things like that, after, presentations. And oftentimes somebody will just come up to you and start talking to you. And then once one person comes up and talks to you, other people feel safe to come up and start talking as well. Right? Because I mean, I say just like putting yourself in the space in the first place. Like,
Yeah,
it's just really easy to go back to your hotel room and like not network, you know?
it's true.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
That's
I'm pretty strategic about at conferences, like which events I'm going to. So I have an idea in my mind before I approach it that, I know there will be people there I can talk to. Often the conference topics are a great icebreaker. Just asking if they had been in a session, or if they, about a speaker, or if you don't know them at all, just finding out where they're from and what they do. That's kind of a good way to start. But yeah, and I especially like it when introverts are networking with other introverts and they recognize that this is not a comfortable space, and so they sort of like bring people in.
Can I share one thing my husband said? We were talking about this session, and he said, when I've gone to networking events at conferences and I'm nervous, I look for someone else who isn't talking to someone.
Nice.
Like people who aren't already engaged in conversation, even if you have no real purpose in talking to them, and just go talk to them. Like they're standing there awkwardly maybe, and you're standing there awkwardly, so hey, like I thought that was a great strategy.
It's a great strategy.
Someone solo.
Yeah.
So, and there's also a question in the chat.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
It says the flip side is how to elegantly, I like this, elegantly exit a conversation when it gets stale.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great question. And we see that a lot at the networking nights. Somebody is really enjoying talking, but, you kind of want to move on to the other thing. And so I think a nice way to do that is thanking them for their thoughts. I really appreciated your thoughts and I really enjoyed meeting you. I want to respect your time. I know there's a lot of people here to talk to. Sometimes that can be a good exit. Or, hey, thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Is there a way I can connect with you later? That might be also, if it's somebody that you do want to connect with, that might be another way to do it. Yeah.
I sometimes have a hard time breaking away from vendors at conferences.
Vendors are
Like
tough.
if nobody else is talking to them and you go up and you're just slightly friendly.
Yeah.
And then they like go into this like 10-minute spiel
Yeah.
about life-saving water
Yep.
like products, and you're like, whoa.
That's tough.
Like-
That's
Have an event to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, if you kind of end with that gratitude,
Mhm.
that's a good way to sort of like
Yeah.
extract yourself from the situation. Let's see. So just like brainstorming some of these icebreakers or these open-ended questions that you might like to ask. How are we doing on time here? Good 10 minutes. Okay, so some of the challenges might be feeling guilty for leaving early or needing a break. And really, if you reframe that and think of it as you are going there for a purpose, and if you accomplish that purpose, then it's perfectly fine to be done with the situation. You have to protect yourself and your mental health and how you are feeling. So don't ever feel guilty for that. That is it is the way we operate. So sometimes it is when you meet a fellow introvert that's difficult to talk with, or that one word answer, again, kind of reframing back to open-ended questions makes it a little bit more of a conversation. Not everybody is going to want to talk, right? Some people are going there because they said they think they have to, but are not really prepared to be doing what they're the networking itself. And so you can always give them an easy out. It's like, great, thanks for, it was nice meeting you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, something like that. And then getting discouraged by non-working groups. I think I saw this an analogous to a donut and a croissant formation. So if you do, you try to talk with somebody and they are talking with a group of colleagues and they're all very tight, and it's hard to like kind of break into that conversation. And so, if you are in a group talking, being conscious of welcoming other people into it, especially if you feel like they're a little bit more nervous about joining the conversation.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat that
Yeah.
was almost exactly that, I think.
Yeah.
What about when there are certain people you really want to connect with but
Mhm.
can't find a good opening?
Yeah.
I don't know if you quite answered that. Like,
it is a challenge. Sometimes, and especially we see this at, like the career fair, if there's a vendor that you want to talk to
Yeah.
that's very popular, it's very difficult to get into. I sometimes will go a little bit early to a networking event to see if I can catch them before they are swamped with people. But sometimes it's a very tight formation and it's really, really hard to be able to connect with them. That might be a point where you try to catch them outside of that networking event, maybe in a session or something like that. Or if it just is not happening, you can reach out to them either like on LinkedIn or something and say, oh, I really wanted to talk with you at this networking event, but I'm sorry we didn't get a chance. Do you think we could find a time to connect?
Yeah.
That might be another strategy.
Squeeze in and
Yeah,
grab a business card.
Elbow in. Yeah.
You just have to summon your extrovertness sometimes
Yeah.
and just be like, I'm entering this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm here.
And that's a great point, because I do like to think of it sometimes as putting on a costume.
Mhm.
Like at this moment, that is what I am doing right here. I'm doing my best extrovert impression. That is what I'm doing. And the good news is it does get easier with practice, and it gets easier with kind of the roles that you find yourself in. So I had a one of my first jobs out of grad school was I was running a makerspace, and one of the duties was to give people tours. And I would come in, then all of a sudden there would be 35 people in the room that I would need to show around. And at first it was absolutely terrifying. I mean, it's just like heart palpitations, they're right here. I haven't practiced. What do I do? But after doing it for a couple of years, then it became really natural. Like it became really, a part of who I was. And it made me, like, I think slightly on the little more extroverted, not totally, but at least in that situation, I could negotiate it.
Would you suggest like trying to attend less important to you networking events,
Mhm.
like maybe try to go to a local conference or even like the career fair, even if you don't feel like you're really needing the career fair, but like just going and practicing
I
in
think
like a much lower stakes
absolutely.
environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even I would even challenge you to do it in your day to day, just slightly. Sometimes I will.
That's a big ask, Amy.
It is a big ask, but like, saying hello, just saying hello to the person behind you in the grocery line, the more you can sort of move yourself into being flexible in those situations, I think the easier you'll find it. Yeah, once a week. I try not to put myself in large, uncomfortable situations, on purpose all the time. But if you can do it incrementally, sometimes that's helpful. So let's see. So following up, making sure you're getting contact information, sending a thank you email for people you met. Now, this is all, like I said, within that active networking type of role, connecting on LinkedIn, and really staying in touch and cultivating those connections. And then, so make sure you give yourself time to recharge. I like staying at the conference hotel so that I can escape and go back to my room if I need a quiet hour to just lay and be still. But plan to reflect on what you learned and really recharge after you go to one of these big things, because that is how you will bounce back a little bit easier, as if you give yourself that time. And then be strategic and plan more networking activities. So passive networking. So I was talking about active networking. This is a little bit more about passive networking. Some of the strategies that you might use for that include just reaching out to people, and, especially on LinkedIn, people are posting their career updates. You might just give them a kudos, start to cultivate those connections in a little bit slower way. Sharing articles or events of interest, that might be a good way to start to build connections. I'm not huge on social media. I don't love it. It's not my like my happy space, but my job does demand that we have a presence. And so I try to be very intentional about the people that I connect with and who I'm talking to, and really try to take an interest in what they're doing.
Can I just say real quick, like sometimes you don't know how much impact that's having. Like I connected with this really cool consultant I met once, and then like 2 years later, I was like, hey, can I like chat with you? And we were Facebook friends. And when we started talking, she's like, oh yeah, that kid's name is this or whatever. And I'm like, wow, you have actually been like following my life for 2 years on Facebook. I really didn't know that. Like,
yeah,
she knew my child's name.
wow.
And I was like,
oh,
whoa.
wow.
And then another thing like that is that I met someone at a conference. I Facebook friended him, a researcher and faculty member at another university. Then the next year when I saw him, he gave me a hug. And I was like, I don't even know you. Like, but we've been interacting on Facebook, like liking each other's photos and stuff. And he just like, I was like, oh,
that's
like,
interesting.
So it really can make a difference to like just do that really, really passive.
Yeah. I know, like I have people on Facebook that I was in a class with this person once, and first, like they like my posts when I put it on. It's like, do you even remember me? And then like joining online group areas, sometimes LinkedIn groups. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I joined the like art instructors for online, teaching, and it's gotten some great tips over the years. It's been very interesting. And then attending webinars in your field, I do see a lot of the same people coming onto like different webinars that are within the field. I even saw, oh gosh, I was listening to this artist talk, and one of the art instructors here that I had known separately was on my friend's artist talk, who was down in New Mexico. And all of a sudden I had something to talk with him about. It's like, oh, I didn't know we knew the same person. And then that kind of fostered a good relationship. So, okay, that's about all I have. And I'm sure everybody here will need to recharge a little bit after we're done. But before I go, is there any questions either online or in the room? in the chat? Okay. Well, you can always find us on Handshake, and we are, don't forget about the Career Services website for any of the resources that you need. We do hold drop-in appointments every Monday through Friday from 11 to 1 in the, right up here in the ISED third floor, and no appointment needed. You can just stop by if you'd like to chat.
We've got lots of introverted thank yous in the chat.
Oh, thank
Just
you.
kidding.
Thank you, my introverts. Have a wonderful day.